It is not challenging to envision a world where at any given instant, you and everyone around you could be eradicated, without forewarning by a mere press of a button. This grim reality was experienced by millions of individuals during the 45-year span following World War II, now widely known as the Cold War, as the United States and the Soviet Union confronted each other across the globe. Both superpowers were well aware of the destructive potential of nuclear weaponry possessed by the other. The most dangerous proximity to devastation occurred during the tense 13-day period known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. In 1961, the United States made an unsuccessful attempt to overthrow the newly established communist government in Cuba, an event that came to be known as the Bay of Pigs invasion. This failed endeavor prompted Cuba to seek assistance from the Soviet Union. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev gladly complied by secretly deploying nuclear missiles to Cuba. These missiles were not only intended to safeguard the island but also to counterbalance the threat posed by US missiles stationed in Italy and Turkey. By the time US intelligence agencies discovered this plan, the necessary materials for the missiles were already in place. During an emergency meeting on October 16, 1962, military advisors strongly urged an airstrike on the missile sites and an invasion of the island. However, President John F. Kennedy opted for a more cautious approach. On October 22, he announced that the US Navy would intercept all shipments bound for Cuba. Yet, there was one major problem. A naval blockade was perceived as an act of war, despite the president's claim that it was a quarantine, which did not disrupt the delivery of essential supplies. The Soviet Union failed to appreciate the distinction. In an impassioned letter to Kennedy, Khrushchev wrote, "The violation of freedom to use international waters and airspace constitutes an act of aggression that propels humanity toward the abyss of a worldwide nuclear missile war." Thus began the most intense 6 days of the Cold War. While the United States demanded the removal of the missiles, Cuba and the Soviet Union maintained that they were purely defensive in nature. As the weapons remained armed, the United States prepared for a potential invasion. On October 27, a US spy plane piloted by Major Rudolph Anderson was shot down by a Soviet missile. That same day, a Soviet submarine armed with nuclear weapons was hit by a shallow depth charge from a US Navy vessel in an attempt to signal it to the surface. Unable to communicate with the surface, the submarine's commanders believed that war had commenced and prepared to launch a nuclear torpedo. Unanimous agreement from 3 officers was required for this decision. While the captain and political officer both authorized the launch, Vasily Arkhipov, second in command, dissented. His resolute refusal saved the day and potentially the world. Nevertheless, the crisis was far from over. For the first time in history, the US military elevated its readiness level to DEFCON 2, just one step away from nuclear warfare. With numerous nuclear missiles poised for launch, the metaphorical doomsday clock stood at 1 minute to midnight. However, diplomatic efforts continued. In Washington, D.C., Attorney General Robert Kennedy held a secret meeting with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. Following intense negotiations, they arrived at a proposal. The United States would remove its missiles from Turkey and Italy and pledge never to invade Cuba, in exchange for the Soviet Union's withdrawal from Cuba under the supervision of the United Nations. Once the meeting concluded, Dobrynin urgently cabled Moscow, emphasizing the need for swift action and the opportunity at hand. The next day at 9 a.m., a message arrived from Khrushchev announcing the Soviet missiles would be withdrawn from Cuba. Finally, the crisis was over. Although criticized by their respective governments at the time for engaging in negotiations with the enemy, current historical research holds high regard for Kennedy and Khrushchev's diplomatic skills in settling the issue. However, the unsettling lesson learned was that a minor communication error or a split-second decision by a commander could have easily undermined their collective efforts, as it nearly did if not for Vasily Arkhipov's courageous choice. The Cuban Missile Crisis exposed the vulnerability of human politics in comparison to the deadly force it has, ready to be unleashed at any time. Thanks for watching, subscribe or follow to support our work.